Little black girl kicked out by stepmother after dad's funeral. But a billionaire ran in and said. The rain drummed against the tall windows of St. Matthew's Cathedral like tiny fists demanding entry. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of white lilies and whispered prayers. 8-year-old Maya Johnson sat in the front pew, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the mahogany casket that held her father's still form. She didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears had dried up 3 days ago when she found Daddy collapsed in his study, his reading glasses still perched on his nose, a half-finished letter scattered on his desk. The doctor said it was his heart, that it simply stopped working, like an old clock winding down. But Maya knew better. Daddy's heart had been breaking for months, ever since Mama died in that terrible car accident 2 years ago. Such a shame, whispered Mrs. Henderson from the second pew, her voice cutting through the organ music like a knife. That poor child, all alone now. Well, not exactly alone, came another voice, sharper, more calculated. Victoria's her stepmother now. She'll take good care of the estate. Maya's stomach twisted at the mention of Victoria, the woman her father had married just 8 months ago in what everyone called a whirlwind romance. Victoria Blackstone, with her perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. The woman who had swept into their lives like a beautiful storm, promising to heal Daddy's broken heart. The service dragged on endlessly. Pastor Williams spoke about eternal rest and heavenly reunions, but his words felt hollow to Maya's ears. She wanted to stand up and scream that Daddy wasn't resting, he was gone, really gone, and no amount of pretty words would bring him back. When the final Amen echoed through the cathedral, people began filing past the casket, dropping roses and murmuring their goodbyes. Maya watched them with growing unease. These people, her father's business associates, country club friends, distant relatives she never met, they spoke in hushed tones about poor little Maya, and what a tragedy. But their eyes held something else entirely. Calculation. Hunger. Time to go, sweetheart. Victoria's manicured hand landed on Maya's shoulder like a spider settling on its web. Up close, her stepmother's perfume was overwhelming, expensive and suffocating. I want to say goodbye to Daddy, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the organ's final notes. You've had plenty of time for that, Victoria replied, her public mask of grief slipping just enough to reveal something harder underneath. We have matters to discuss at home. The ride to Willowbrook Manor, the sprawling estate that had been in the Johnson family for 3 generations, passed in oppressive silence. Maya pressed her face against the limousine's tinted window, watching the familiar oak trees blur past like old friends waving farewell. Something in her chest tightened with each mile, as if invisible threads connecting her to her father were stretching to their breaking point. The manor loomed ahead, its Georgian columns and ivy-covered walls looking more like a mausoleum than a home in the gray afternoon light. Maya had always loved this house, its hidden passages, the library with floor-to-ceiling books, the garden where Mama used to grow roses. But now it felt different, as if the very walls had shifted while they were gone. The great hall buzzed with activity. People Maya didn't recognize moved through the rooms with purposeful steps, men in expensive suits carrying briefcases, women with sharp eyes and sharper smiles. The funeral reception had supposedly ended hours ago, but these weren't mourners. They moved like scavengers, and Maya was just a small obstacle in their path. Maya, darling, come here. Victoria's voice carried across the hall, saccharine sweet but with an edge that made Maya's skin crawl. She stood near the grand staircase, surrounded by the same hungry-eyed strangers, her black dress somehow managing to look more like evening wear than funeral attire. Maya walked over slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The adults towered above her, their conversation stopping as she approached. She could feel their stares like physical weight. Now then, Victoria began, her voice carrying through the hall with theatrical precision. I know today has been difficult for all of us. Charles was a complicated man with complicated affairs. She paused, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. But life must go on, and certain Adjustments must be made. Maya's heart began to race. Something in Victoria's tone, in the way the other adults shifted and glanced at each other, sent alarm bells screaming in her head. You see, sweetheart, Victoria continued, crouching down to Maya's eye level but keeping her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. This house requires significant maintenance. The staff, the grounds, the expenses, they're simply overwhelming for someone so young. And frankly, after everything that's happened, I think a fresh start would be best for everyone. What do you mean? Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. Victoria's smile stretched wider, but her eyes remained ice-cold. I mean, my dear, that you'll be much happier with your Aunt Sarah in Portland. She's already agreed to take you in. Isn't that wonderful? The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Aunt Sarah, her father's sister who had visited exactly twice in Maya's entire life, who lived in a tiny apartment 3,000 miles away, who had never shown any interest in having children. But this is my home, Maya whispered, her voice breaking. Daddy said this would always be my home. Oh, sweetheart. Victoria sighed dramatically. Children don't inherit houses. That's not how the world works. This estate, the businesses, everything, it all comes to me now. I'm his wife, after all. His widow. The word widow dripped from Victoria's lips like poison honey. Around them, the adults nodded approvingly, as if this were all perfectly reasonable, perfectly normal. As if an 8-year-old girl being stripped of everything she'd ever known was just another business transaction to be handled with efficient cruelty. My father wouldn't want this, Maya said, louder now, her small voice echoing off the marble floors. He loved me. He said I was his princess, his little heir. He wouldn't want you to send me away. Victoria's mask slipped completely then, just for a moment, and Maya saw something terrifying in her stepmother's eyes. Not just coldness, but genuine hatred. Your father, Victoria hissed, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout, is dead. And dead men don't get to make decisions. I do. She straightened up, her public smile sliding back into place like armor. Now Mrs. Patterson here will help you pack your things. Just the essentials, of course. Everything else stays with the house. Maya felt the world tilting around her, as if the marble floor beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. In fairy tales, when little girls lost their parents, kind relatives swooped in to save them. Magic happened. Love conquered all. But there was no magic here. Only cruel adults with empty smiles and legal papers. Only a stepmother who looked at Maya like she was a problem to be solved rather than a child to be loved. Please, Maya whispered, but Victoria had already turned away, deep in conversation with a man in a pinstripe suit about liquidating assets and maximizing returns. Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman with gray hair and no-nonsense eyes, appeared at Maya's elbow with a small suitcase. Come along, child. Best to get this over with quickly. As they climbed the grand staircase toward Maya's bedroom, the little girl could hear Victoria's voice floating up behind them, no longer bothering to hide her triumph. Complete control of the estate by week's end. The girl was the only complication, and now that's resolved. We can finally move forward with our plans. Maya's bedroom door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Through her window, she could see the garden where her mother used to chase her through the rose bushes, where her father had taught her to identify different birds by their songs. Soon, it would all belong to strangers. But as Mrs. Patterson began folding Maya's clothes with mechanical efficiency, something stirred in the little girl's chest. Not despair, she'd felt enough of that to last a lifetime. This was something else. Something harder and brighter and infinitely more dangerous. Because Maya remembered something Victoria clearly didn't know about. Something her father had whispered to her just 2 weeks ago, when he'd taken her into his study late at night and made her promise to remember certain numbers, certain names, certain hiding places. Sometimes, princess, he'd said, his voice heavy with a sadness she hadn't understood then. The people closest to us aren't who they seem to be. But Daddy's going to make sure you're always protected, no matter what happens to me. As the suitcase snapped shut with finality, Maya allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Victoria might think she'd won, but the game was far from over. After all, in the best fairy tales, the real magic didn't happen at the beginning. It happened just when everything seemed lost. The black sedan pulled up the circular driveway just as Mrs. Patterson was loading Maya's single suitcase into Victoria's limousine. Maya sat on the manor's front steps, her small frame dwarfed by the massive columns, watching her entire world disappear into the back of a car. "Time to go, dear," Victoria called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She stood in the doorway like a queen surveying her newly conquered kingdom, already changed from her funeral dress into a sharp business suit. "Your flight to Portland leaves in 3 hours." Maya didn't move. Something inside her refused to accept this ending. Not like this, not without a fight. The numbers her father had whispered echoed in her head, 4-7-9-2. The name he'd made her memorize, Alexander Cross. The location he'd described in careful detail, behind the false panel in his study. The sedan's engine cut off with a decisive click that seemed to silence the entire estate. Maya looked up as the driver's door opened, expecting another of Victoria's cold-eyed associates. Instead, a man stepped out who commanded attention like gravity commands falling objects. He was tall, easily 6'4", with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that made everyone within 50 feet instinctively straighten their spines. His charcoal suit probably cost more than most people's cars, but it was his eyes that made Maya catch her breath. They were steel gray and blazing with a fury that could have melted glass. "Alexander Cross," Maya whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Victoria's confident smile faltered as the man strode up the walkway with purposeful steps that echoed like thunder on the stone path. The business associates who had been lounging around the estate suddenly found reasons to step back, to fade into the shadows of the portico. "Victoria Blackstone," the man said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brokers no argument. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation wrapped in silk. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" Victoria's voice climbed half an octave, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. "This is a private residence, and we're dealing with family matters." Alexander Cross stopped directly in front of the steps where Maya sat, close enough that she could see the expensive watch on his wrist, the perfectly knotted tie, the way his jaw tightened as he took in the scene before him, the packed car, the frightened child, the woman trying to project power she didn't truly possess. "Family matters," he repeated, each word sharp enough to cut. "Is that what you call stealing a child's inheritance while she's still grieving her father?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Victoria's face went through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Maya is going to live with relatives. It's what's best for her." "What's best for her?" Cross said, pulling a leather portfolio from his jacket. "Or what's most convenient for your little scheme?" Maya found herself holding her breath. This was the moment her father had prepared her for, even if she hadn't understood it then. The mysterious Alexander Cross wasn't just a name in her father's whispered warnings. He was salvation walking up her front steps in a $1,000 suit. "Charles Johnson was my business partner for 15 years. Cross continued, his voice carrying across the estate grounds like a proclamation. "Did you really think his death would go unnoticed by those who knew him best? Did you honestly believe you could simply waltz in here and claim everything he's spent decades building?" Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "His will was very clear. As his widow, I inherit his public holdings, yes?" Cross interrupted, opening the portfolio with deliberate precision. "The house, the visible assets, the things any decent estate lawyer could identify." His smile was sharper than broken glass. "But Charles was far more clever than you gave him credit for. You see, Mrs. Blackstone, you've been so focused on the visible empire that you completely missed the invisible one." Maya felt electricity crackling in the air around them. The other adults had gone completely silent, their faces reflecting a growing understanding that they had dramatically underestimated the situation. What invisible empire? Victoria demanded, but her voice had reduced to barely more than a whisper. Cross pulled out a thick document, its pages bound in blue legal backing. Shell companies. Offshore trusts. Investment portfolios hidden behind layers of corporate structure so complex it would take a team of forensic accountants months to unravel them. He looked directly at Maya, and his harsh expression softened just enough to let kindness show through. Charles built a financial fortress, Mrs. Blackstone. And the only key to that fortress sits right there on those steps. Every eye turned to Maya, who felt the world shifting beneath her like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. Her father hadn't just loved her, he had protected her in ways she was only beginning to understand. That's impossible. Victoria sputtered. She's just a child. Children can't control a revocable trust established in their name before their 9th birthday? Cross finished. Oh, but they can, Mrs. Blackstone. Especially when those trusts are structured by lawyers who specialize in protecting assets from exactly the kind of predatory behavior you've displayed today. Maya stood up slowly, her small frame somehow seeming larger as understanding dawned. How much money? She asked, her voice steady for the first time since her father's death. Cross's smile became genuine, warm and proud and infinitely reassuring. Enough to buy this estate 50 times over, Princess. Enough to ensure you never have to depend on anyone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. Victoria's legs gave out. She sank onto the manor's stone steps, her face white as marble, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. But the legal documents, she began desperately, are worthless, Cross said simply. Charles may have married you, Mrs. Blackstone, but he never trusted you. And now we all know why. Maya looked up at this stranger who had just turned her entire world upside down, again, and saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen since her father died. Someone who actually cared what happened to her. What happens now? She asked. What happens now? She asked. Cross knelt down to her eye level, his expression gentle but determined. Now, young lady, we make sure your father's real wishes are honored. And we make sure you get exactly what he wanted you to have, everything. Victoria Blackstone didn't stay down for long. By the next morning, she had transformed from a devastated widow into a woman possessed, pacing the marble floors of Willowbrook Manor like a caged panther planning her escape. Maya watched from the top of the grand staircase as Victoria barked orders into her phone, her voice sharp enough to cut diamonds. I don't care what it costs, Marcus. Find me something. Anything that proves that little brat has no legal claim to Charles's assets. The little brat in question sat hidden behind the banister's carved oak spindles, still wearing the same black dress from yesterday's funeral. Alexander Cross had taken her under his protection, as promised, but that protection felt fragile in the face of Victoria's renewed fury. Ma'am, came the nervous voice of Stevens, the manor's elderly butler. There are gentlemen here to see you. They say it's about legal documentation. Victoria's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Send them to the study. And Stevens? Make sure they're comfortable. These gentlemen are going to help me solve a very expensive problem. Maya crept down the hallway toward her father's study, her bare feet silent on the Persian runners. Through the crack in the door, she could see Victoria sitting behind Daddy's massive mahogany desk like she owned not just the furniture, but the very air in the room. 3 men in expensive suits sat across from her, the kind of men Maya instinctively knew were dangerous despite their polished appearances. They had the look of sharks in a feeding frenzy. Mrs. Blackstone, the tallest one said, his voice smooth as oil. I understand you have a delicate situation regarding your late husband's estate. Delicate is one word for it, Victoria replied, sliding a photograph across the desk. Maya's school picture stared back at them, pigtails, gap-toothed smile, completely innocent. This 8-year-old somehow has legal control over assets worth more than some small country's GDP. The second man, younger but with cold eyes that reminded Maya of a snake, leaned forward. Children's trust can be challenging, but not impossible to contest. Especially if we can prove the child is mentally unfit to handle such responsibility. Maya's blood ran cold. They were talking about her like she was a problem to be solved, not a person with feelings and rights. That's one approach, the third man said, opening a briefcase that gleamed like a weapon. But I prefer more direct methods. Documentation can be adjusted. Witnesses can be persuaded. And sometimes, original legal papers have unfortunate accidents. Victoria's smile was predatory. I like the way you think, Mr. Harrison. What exactly are you proposing? Simple, Harrison replied, pulling out what looked like official documents. We create a new version of your husband's will, one that names you as sole heir and guardian, with full control over any trusts established for the child. We backdate it, create a paper trail, and suddenly your problem disappears. Maya pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from gasping. They were talking about forging her father's will, about stealing everything he had tried to protect for her. And the existing documentation? Victoria asked. The snake-eyed man smiled. Files get lost. Computer systems crash. Sometimes entire legal offices suffer from mysterious break-ins. It's amazing how fragile paper can be when properly motivated. Maya watched in horror as Victoria leaned back in her father's chair, looking more relaxed than she had since Alexander Cross's dramatic arrival. Gentlemen, I think we have a deal. What do you need from me? Your husband's personal papers, for starters, Harrison said. We need to study his signature, his writing patterns, his legal language preferences. The forgery has to be perfect. Victoria was already moving toward the wall safe behind her father's portrait. Maya knew that safe. Daddy had shown her the combination just months before his death, making her promise to remember it for emergencies. She watched Victoria's manicured fingers dance across the digital keypad, 0-8-1-4. Maya's birthday. The safe swung open, revealing stacks of documents, jewelry boxes, and thick manila envelopes. But as Victoria reached inside, her expression changed from triumph to confusion, then to growing panic. Where are they? She muttered, pulling out envelope after envelope, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. Where are Charles's personal papers? His private correspondence? His... She stopped dead, holding up an envelope with her own name written across it in her late husband's distinctive handwriting. With shaking hands, she tore it open and read the single sheet inside. The color drained from her face like water from a broken dam. What is it? The tall man asked. Victoria's voice came out as barely a whisper. He knew. Charles knew what I was planning. She looked up at the three men with something close to terror in her eyes. This letter. He says he moved all his important documents to a secure location. He says if anything happens to him, I should know that he took precautions to protect what matters most. Maya felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Even in death, her father was still protecting her. Harrison snatched the letter from Victoria's trembling hands. This doesn't change anything. We can still manufacture the documents we need. In fact, this makes it easier. If the originals are missing, who's to say our versions aren't the real ones? But Victoria wasn't listening. She was staring at something else she'd found in the safe, a small, leather-bound journal with a note attached. For Victoria's eyes only, when you realize what you've lost. She opened the journal with hands that shook like autumn leaves, and Maya watched her stepmother's face transform as she read. Whatever was written in those pages hit Victoria like a physical blow. What does it say? The youngest lawyer demanded. Victoria's laugh was hollow, broken. It says Charles documented everything. Every conversation, every lie, every manipulation. He's been building a case against me for months. She looked up at the men with wild eyes. He knew I married him for his money. He knew I was planning to get rid of Maya somehow. And he wrote it all down. The three men exchanged nervous glances. This was clearly not what they had signed up for. Mrs. Blackstone, Harrison said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. No! Victoria slammed the journal shut. I've come too far to give up now. That little girl is not going to inherit what should be mine. If we can't forge documents, we'll find another way. She stood up, her eyes blazing with desperate determination. Double your fees, gentlemen. Because we're not just fighting for money anymore, we're fighting for my survival. And I'll do whatever it takes to win. Maya crept away from the door, her heart pounding. She had heard enough to know that Victoria's war was far from over. If anything, learning about her father's precautions had made her stepmother more dangerous than ever. But as she tiptoed back toward her room, Maya remembered something else her father had told her. Real strength, princess, isn't about being the loudest or the most frightening. It's about being smart, being patient, and trusting the people who truly care about you. Victoria might have lawyers and forgers and desperate plans. But Maya had something much more powerful, the truth, and a billionaire who seemed determined to help her use it. That night, while Victoria was locked away in her room making frantic phone calls to lawyers across 3 states, Maya crept through the familiar darkness of Willowbrook Manor toward her father's study. The house felt different now, not like home, but like a battlefield where every shadow could hide an enemy. Alexander Cross had given her a secure phone before leaving that evening, his steel-gray eyes serious as he pressed it into her small hands. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately, he'd said. Your father made me promise to keep you safe, and I don't break promises to dead friends. Now, alone in the moonlit corridor, Maya clutched that phone like a lifeline as she approached the study door. The numbers her father had whispered echoed in her memory, 4-7-9-2. She had been too young to understand then, but now she realized they weren't just random digits. They were coordinates. Row 4, column 7, book 92. The study door creaked open on well-oiled hinges. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the walls lined with leather-bound volumes. Maya had spent countless hours in this room, curled up in the reading chair while Daddy worked at his desk, the scratch of his pen and the whisper of turning pages creating a symphony of safety. Now the room felt like a tomb filled with secrets. Maya made her way to the 4th bookshelf, counting carefully. Column 7 held a collection of business journals from the 1990s, books she'd never seen her father read. She ran her fingers along the spines until she found volume 92, a thick tome about international finance that looked untouched by human hands. But when she pulled it from the shelf, it came away too easily, too lightly. Her heart racing, Maya opened the cover and gasped. The book had been hollowed out, its pages carved away to create a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small digital tablet, a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, and a USB drive marked with a single word. Maya. With trembling fingers, she powered on the tablet. Her father's face appeared on the screen, older, wearier than she remembered, but with the same kind eyes that had read her bedtime stories and chased away nightmares. Hello, princess, his recorded voice said, and Maya had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. If you're watching this, then something has happened to me, and Victoria has shown her true colors. The video continued as Maya sank into her father's leather chair, clutching the tablet like a treasure. I know this is confusing, sweetheart, but Daddy needs you to be very brave now. You see, I discovered some things about Victoria that made me realize she didn't marry me because she loved me. She married me because she thought I was rich, and she was right, just not in the way she expected. Maya's father leaned closer to the camera, his expression growing serious. The money everyone thinks I have, the house, the cars, the obvious wealth, that's all real, but it's also just the tip of the iceberg. The real fortune, the one I built for you, is hidden where people like Victoria can never find it. The screen changed to show complex charts and diagrams that made Maya's head spin. Companies with names like Butterfly Holdings and Starlight International, bank accounts in countries she'd never heard of, investment portfolios that seemed to stretch across the entire globe. 23 years ago, when your mother and I were just starting out, I made a deal with Alexander Cross. Her father's voice continued. He was already a billionaire, but he needed a partner he could trust completely, someone to help him move money through legitimate channels, someone who could keep secrets. In exchange, he taught me how to hide wealth from people who might try to take it away. Maya's eyes widened as the scope of her father's hidden empire became clear. This wasn't just about being rich, this was about being untouchably powerful. Every shell company, every offshore account, every investment trust is structured the same way, Princess. They can only be accessed by you, and only when you reach certain milestones. Some unlock on your 16th birthday, others when you graduate college, and the biggest ones when you turn 25. But there are emergency protocols too, ways to access the funds if you're in danger. The video paused, and Maya realized her father was choosing his words very carefully. Victoria doesn't know about any of this, but she suspects something. I've been watching her, documenting her behavior, preparing for the day when her mask finally slips completely. His expression hardened. She's not just greedy, Maya. She's dangerous. The car accident that killed your mother. I don't think it was an accident at all. Maya's blood turned to ice. Her mother's death had been ruled an accident, brake failure on a rainy night, a terrible tragedy that could have happened to anyone. But now, seeing the pain in her father's eyes, she began to understand why he had started building these defenses. I can't prove it yet, but I have my suspicions. Victoria knew your mother had life insurance, knew that her death would leave me vulnerable and grieving. She played the role of the supportive friend perfectly, didn't she? Always there with a shoulder to cry on, always ready to help with funeral arrangements and legal paperwork. Maya remembered those dark months after her mother's death, when Victoria had indeed been a constant presence in their home. She'd thought it was kindness then. Now it felt like a spider weaving its web around trapped prey. But here's what Victoria doesn't know, her father continued, his voice growing stronger. Every conversation we've had since I started suspecting her has been recorded. Every financial document she's asked about has been copied and stored in multiple locations. And every lie she's told has been documented in a journal that's now in Alexander's possession. The tablet showed an image of a thick leather journal, the same one Victoria had found in the safe, the one that had made her face go white with terror. The codes I taught you, the numbers and names, they're not just hiding places for money, Princess. They're hiding places for evidence. Evidence that will not only protect you but ensure that Victoria pays for what she's done. Maya's hands shook as she reached for the stack of letters. Each envelope was marked with a different date, stretching back almost 2 years. As she opened the first one, her father's careful handwriting revealed conversations, observations, and growing concerns about Victoria's true motivations. March 15th, Victoria asked about Maya's trust fund again today. Third time this month. She thinks I don't notice how her questions always circle back to money, to inheritance laws, to what would happen if something happened to me. April 2nd, found Victoria in my study last night, going through financial papers. She claimed she was looking for insurance documents, but the papers she was reading had nothing to do with insurance. May 18th, Victoria suggested Maya would be better off, with proper guardians, if anything ever happened to me. When I asked what she meant, she quickly changed the subject. I'm beginning to see the pattern. Each letter built a clearer picture of Victoria's manipulation, her gradual attempts to isolate Maya from her father, her growing frustration when she couldn't access the information she wanted. But the final letter, dated just 1 week before her father's death, made Maya's heart stop. I think she's planning something. Victoria's been asking too many questions about my heart medication, about my medical history. She's also been unusually attentive lately, bringing me coffee in the mornings, insisting on preparing my meals. I've started testing everything before I eat it. I pray I'm wrong, but I'm going to change the locks on my study tonight and move the most important documents to Alexander's vault. If something happens to me, Maya, remember, you are stronger than you know, smarter than they think, and protected by people who love you more than money. Victoria may win battles, but she will never win the war. Maya clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her father hadn't just died of a broken heart. He'd died trying to protect her from a woman who saw murder as just another business transaction. But he'd also left her the weapons she needed to fight back. The USB drive contained everything: financial records, recorded conversations, video evidence, and a complete map of the empire he built in her name. Victoria thought she was fighting an 8-year-old girl for a simple inheritance. She had no idea she was about to face the fury of a carefully planned 23-year strategy, orchestrated by a dead man who had loved his daughter enough to move mountains to protect her. Maya wiped her tears and reached for the secure phone Alexander Cross had given her. It was time to remind Victoria that some games were won before they were even played. The courthouse steps gleamed like marble teeth in the morning sun as Maya climbed them alongside Alexander Cross, her small hand lost in his protective grip. 3 weeks had passed since that midnight discovery in her father's study, 3 weeks of preparation for this moment, when everything would finally come to light. Victoria stood near the courthouse entrance surrounded by her army of lawyers, looking every inch the grieving widow in her tailored black suit and pearls. But Maya could see the desperation hidden beneath the expensive facade, the way Victoria's hands trembled slightly, the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could fully conceal. "Remember what we practiced, Princess," Cross murmured as they approached the courthouse doors. "Tell the truth, stay calm, and trust that your father's plan will work." Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with tension thick enough to cut. News reporters filled the back rows, drawn by whispers of a billion-dollar inheritance battle between a child and her stepmother. Judge Patricia Hawthorne, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for tolerating no nonsense, called the proceedings to order. "We're here today," she announced, "to determine the rightful heir to Charles Johnson's estate and the guardianship of his minor daughter, Maya Johnson." Victoria's lead attorney, Marcus Steinberg, rose first, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of smile that made Maya think of sharks. "Your Honor, this case is quite straightforward. My client, Victoria Blackstone Johnson, is the legal widow of Charles Johnson. As such, she inherits his estate and assumes guardianship of his daughter according to the will filed with this court." Steinberg presented document after document, each one looking official and legitimate. Maya watched the judge's face carefully, searching for any sign of doubt or suspicion. But Judge Hawthorne's expression remained neutral as she examined the papers. "Furthermore," Steinberg continued, "we have evidence that suggests the minor child has been subjected to undue influence by outside parties seeking to manipulate her for financial gain." His cold gaze landed on Alexander Cross. Mr. Cross has been filling this grieving child's head with fantasies about hidden fortunes and secret empires, clearly hoping to gain control over the Johnson assets through her. Maya felt Cross's hand tighten reassuringly on her shoulder as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Victoria's plan was becoming clear: paint Cross as the villain and Maya as his innocent victim, while positioning herself as the protective mother figure. "We have witnesses," Steinberg announced triumphantly, "who will testify that Mr. Cross has been seen entering the Johnson estate at all hours, conducting what can only be described as clandestine meetings with the child." Victoria took the stand first, her performance worthy of an Academy Award. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she spoke about her beloved husband and her deep concern for Maya's well-being. "Charles was a simple businessman," she said, her voice breaking just enough to sound genuine. "He left everything to me because he trusted me to take care of his precious daughter. But Mr. Cross has been filling Maya's head with lies about hidden money and secret documents. It's heartbreaking to see a child so manipulated." But when Cross's attorney, Sarah Chin, rose for cross-examination, Maya saw Victoria's confident mask begin to crack. "Mrs. Johnson," Chin said, her voice deceptively gentle, "you mentioned that your husband was a simple businessman. Are you familiar with Butterfly Holdings International?" Victoria blinked. No, I don't believe so. What about Starlight Investment Trust? Cascade Financial Group? Phoenix Rising LLC? With each name, Victoria's face grew paler. Maya watched her stepmother realize that her carefully constructed lies were about to collapse like a house of cards. "I wouldn't know about such things," Victoria said weakly. Chun smiled, not a shark's smile, but something far more dangerous. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that not only proves Mr. Charles Johnson was far from a simple businessman, but also demonstrates that Mrs. Johnson knew exactly what she was trying to steal. The courtroom fell silent as Chen activated a large screen. Maya's father's face appeared, older and wearier than in life, but his eyes blazing with quiet determination. This video, Chen announced, was recorded by Charles Johnson 6 days before his death and deposited with Cross Financial's secure vault, along with instructions that it only be opened in the event of legal proceedings regarding his estate. Victoria shot to her feet. Objection. This is clearly fabricated. Mrs. Johnson, Judge Hawthorne said sharply, you are not an attorney. Please sit down. On screen, Charles Johnson began to speak. If this recording is being played, then Victoria has shown her true colors, and my daughter needs the protection I've tried to build for her. Maya watched her father's image with tears streaming down her cheeks as he methodically destroyed Victoria's lies. He detailed the hidden empire he'd built over 23 years, the shell companies and offshore accounts, the partnership with Alexander Cross that had protected billions in assets from exactly the kind of predatory behavior Victoria had displayed. But it was what came next that made the courtroom gasp. I have reason to believe, Charles continued, that my wife Victoria Blackstone was responsible for my first wife's death, and that she may be attempting to harm me as well. Victoria went white as marble. This is insane. Charles was sick, he was paranoid. Furthermore, the recording continued, I have been documenting suspicious incidents. Victoria has been unusually interested in my heart medication, has insisted on preparing my meals, and has asked detailed questions about my will and Maya's trust funds. I've had my food tested, and the results are concerning. Chin presented a laboratory report to the judge. Trace amounts of digitalis, Your Honor, a heart medication that in larger doses can cause fatal cardiac episodes. This report was filed with the police department just 2 days before Mr. Johnson's death. The courtroom erupted. Victoria was on her feet, screaming denials, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Maya watched in fascination as her stepmother's carefully constructed world imploded in real time. But Chen wasn't finished. Your Honor, we also have these. The screen filled with images of documents, bank statements, forged wills, communications with the corrupt lawyers Maya had overheard in her father's study. Every illegal plan, every bribery attempt, every forged signature was laid bare for the world to see. Mrs. Johnson didn't just try to steal from a child, Chen said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She committed fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy, all while playing the role of the grieving widow. Judge Hawthorne's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! Order in this court! As the chaos died down, Maya saw Victoria slumped in her chair, her face buried in her hands. The woman who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable just hours before, now looked like exactly what she was, a common criminal caught in an elaborate web of her own making. In light of this evidence, Judge Hawthorne said, her voice ringing with authority, I am not only awarding full custody of Maya Johnson to Alexander Cross as her father's designated guardian, but I am also ordering the immediate investigation of Victoria Blackstone for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. As the bailiffs moved toward Victoria, she looked up one final time, her eyes meeting Maya's across the crowded courtroom. Gone was any pretense of maternal love or concern. What Maya saw there was pure, undiluted hatred, the look of a predator whose prey had somehow turned the tables. But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. She was protected by people who truly loved her, armed with the truth, and backed by an empire her father had built specifically to keep her safe. Victoria Blackstone had lost everything. And Maya Johnson was just getting started. 6 months later, Maya stood in the grand foyer of Willowbrook Manor, but everything had changed. The cold marble floors now gleamed with warmth, fresh flowers bloomed in crystal vases, and the sound of laughter echoed through halls that had once felt like a mausoleum. Most importantly, the house felt like home again. Miss Maya, Stevens called out, his elderly face bright with genuine joy for the first time since her father's death. Mr. Cross is here for your lesson. Maya smiled, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen for the day. Gone were the expensive designer outfits Victoria had insisted on. Maya preferred clothes that let her climb trees and explore the estate's hidden passages without worry. She was still an 8-year-old girl, after all, even if she was also one of the wealthiest children in the world. Alexander Cross entered the foyer carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his usual immaculate suit, but his steel-gray eyes held the warmth of a father figure rather than a business partner. Over the past months, he had become exactly what her real father had hoped, a guardian who protected not just Maya's fortune, but her childhood as well. "Ready for today's lesson, princess?" he asked, using the same endearment her father had loved. Maya nodded eagerly. 3 times a week, Cross taught her about the empire her father had built, not the boring details that would come later, but the big picture, the philosophy behind it, the responsibility that came with such power. He made it feel like stories about knights and kingdoms, where money was just a tool for protecting people and doing good in the world. They settled into her father's study, which Maya had reclaimed as her own. The hidden compartment behind Book 92 now held new treasures, drawings she'd made, letters from the boarding schools she'd chosen to attend in the fall, and most precious of all, new recordings from her father that Cross had been releasing gradually, like birthday presents that would last for years. "Your father left specific instructions about today's lesson," Cross said, opening his briefcase with ceremony. "He wanted you to understand something important about justice." Maya perked up. She'd been fascinated by the concept of justice ever since Victoria's trial had made headlines around the world. The woman who had tried to steal her inheritance was now serving a 15-year prison sentence for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The corrupt lawyers who had helped her were facing their own legal troubles. And the forged documents they'd created had been exposed as evidence of a criminal enterprise that reached far beyond just Maya's family. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Cross explained, pulling out a tablet that showed news articles from the past few months. "It's about making things right, about protecting people who can't protect themselves." The screen displayed headlines that made Maya's heart swell with pride. "Johnson Foundation donates $50 million to children's charities. New legal protections for minor heirs passed after Johnson case. Willowbrook Manor opens public gardens in memory of Elizabeth Johnson." "You see," Cross continued, "your father didn't build this empire just to make you rich. He built it to give you the power to change the world. And you've already started." Maya thought about the decisions she'd helped make over the past months. The children's hospital wing they'd funded. The scholarship program for kids who had lost their parents. The legal reform that would make it harder for people like Victoria to prey on grieving families. Each choice had felt natural, right, like she was carrying on conversations she'd started with her father years ago. "There's something else," Cross said, his voice growing softer. "Victoria requested a meeting." Maya's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen her stepmother since that day in court when the bailiffs had led her away in handcuffs. Part of her never wanted to see that woman again. But another part, the part that sounded like her father's voice, was curious about what Victoria could possibly have to say now. "She's in prison," Maya said carefully. "What could she want?" "To apologize, according to her lawyer. To ask for your forgiveness." Cross studied Maya's face intently. "But the choice is entirely yours, princess. You don't owe her anything, not your time, not your attention, and certainly not your forgiveness." Maya was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Through the study windows, she could see the gardens where her mother used to chase her through the roses, where her father had taught her to identify birds by their songs. This room, this house, this life, Victoria had tried to take all of it away. But she had failed. "I'll see her," Maya decided. "But not because she deserves it. Because I want to show her what she lost when she chose greed over love." Cross smiled, proud, protective, and just a little bit fierce. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." 3 weeks later, Maya sat across from Victoria Blackstone in the sterile visiting room of Millfield Correctional Facility. The woman who had once seemed so beautiful and powerful now looked older, smaller, broken by the weight of her choices. Her designer clothes had been replaced by orange prison uniforms, her perfect makeup by dark circles and worry lines. Maya, Victoria began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I needed to tell you. I know what you needed to tell me. Maya interrupted, her voice steady and calm. You're sorry. You made mistakes. You wish things had been different. She leaned forward slightly. But here's what I need to tell you, Victoria. I forgive you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, hope flickering across her face like candlelight. Not because you deserve it, Maya continued, and not because what you did was okay. I forgive you because holding on to anger would poison me the same way greed poisoned you. I forgive you because my parents taught me that love is always stronger than hate. Maya stood up, suddenly looking far older than her 8 years. You tried to steal my fortune, my home, my future. But you couldn't steal the most important thing my father gave me, the knowledge that I'm loved, protected, and capable of amazing things. As Maya walked toward the exit, Victoria called out desperately. What happens now? What happens to me? Maya paused at the door, looking back one final time. You serve your sentence and hopefully learn to be a better person. As for me? She smiled, not cruel, but confident, radiant with possibility. I go home and figure out how to use $1 billion empire to make the world a better place. The prison door closed behind Maya with a soft click, sealing away the last chapter of Victoria's story and opening infinite chapters for her own. Outside, Alexander Cross waited by the car, his face questioning. How do you feel? He asked as they drove away from the prison. Maya watched the building disappear in the rearview mirror, then turned her attention to the road ahead, wide, bright, and full of promise. Free, she said simply. I feel free. And for the first time since her father's funeral, Maya Johnson smiled not because she had to, not because someone expected it, but because she was genuinely, completely happy. The little girl who had been kicked out of her own father's funeral had become exactly what Charles Johnson had dreamed she would be, not just an heiress, but a force for good in a world that desperately needed more people who understood that true power comes not from taking, but from giving. Maya's story was just beginning.